Hey, before the video starts, I want to make one very obvious thing clear. The technology and society I'm going to be discussing in this video is not something I expect to happen in the next few years or even decades. I expect it to happen by the end of this century or later. And also, I'm not 100% certain that this will happen. I just think it's very likely. Entertainment is one of the oldest human traditions. From telling stories around a campfire, to concerts, from film to tourism, from art to sports, entertainment seems to be something humans have always practiced. And for nearly all of human history, entertainment has always been made by other humans. And it has always been, quote unquote, real, meaning the experience was in the real world rather than a simulated one. But in the 21st century, we might be right at the beginning of the end for real-life entertainment. The largest chunk of the entertainment industry is the gaming industry. And that's not very surprising for a few reasons. For one, gaming is a much broader category than film, books, or TV shows. I looked up the definition of video games, and Google gave me this: a game played electronically manipulating images produced by a computer program on a monitor or display. That is an extremely vague definition. Basically, all computer programs require you to move images on your screen in order to use them. Even your mouse cursor is an image. This means a video game can be anything from answering text prompts to shooting enemy combatants, to checking people's passports, or conquering empires. Even moving your mouse around your computer and seeing how long you can do it is a video game. And the second reason why games are so profitable and so large is because gamers are a bit special. And by that I mean people who play video games treat playing video games like it's a major part of who they are. Like, you very rarely see a person call themselves a moviegoer or a TV show watcher, but the term gamer is so overused that it's basically a meme. And even people who find the term cringy or stupid still suffer from the problem of buying video games simply for the sake of buying them. Like buying video games during Steam sales, knowing fully well that you'll never play them. And there are also a lot more ways to monetize a video game. Like, instead of selling products in real life where it costs money to produce each unit, and it needs to be shipped out to the consumer or store, which costs even more money, game companies can instead sell digital merchandise and products, which cost basically nothing to produce and duplicate, and the price tag can be whatever they want. That's not even to mention pay to win, or how much money is spent on PC hardware to make it as performance heavy as humanly possible. But because so many people's computers are so powerful, game companies can get away with making less optimized, lazier games that look just as good as games made 10 years ago, but require much better and more expensive hardware to run. You get the idea. It's not surprising that the gaming industry is the largest by a wide margin. And with that profitability and size, I believe this industry has the biggest potential to create the immersive idea of simulated reality. Virtual reality sucks right now. There's no nice way to put it. It's terrible in almost every way. Some people might argue that Beat Saber is still pretty cool. But no, Beat Saber is just a more complicated Wii game that is more dangerous for you, your house, and your friends. Because you're just playing a Wii game with blinders on. And even if you still like the game, one good game is still not enough to make the entirety of VR worth it. And social interactions in VR are either barely as good as normal games, or much worse. You don't need VR to play most of these games, and VR doesn't make them much better. It just makes them more tiring and annoying for your eyes and body. One of the main reasons for this annoyance is that you actually have to get up from your chair and move your body in order to do anything in the game. And the controllers are never good enough. It's always more finicky and less effective than just using a mouse and keyboard or a regular controller. If only there was a way to move a character on your screen just as well as you can move your real-life body, without needing to actually move your body. Quote-unquote mind reading is still absolutely in its beginner stages. But we have two main methods of interpreting human brain activity as movement and thought information. AI that reads directly from brain signals and interprets those signals as data. This gives the AI the ability to see people's dreams and literally read thoughts.
How about this? Can we go from the patterns of your brain when you're looking at an image to reconstructing the image? So the way this worked was they put human beings inside an fMRI machine. They had them look at images and figure out what the patterns are, like translate from image to brain patterns. And then of course they would hide the image. So this is an image of a giraffe that the computer has never seen. it's only looking at the fMRI data, and this is what the computer thinks the human is seeing. Yeah. But of course it goes further. So in this one, they said, can they understand the inner monologue, the things you're saying to yourself in your own mind? Mind you, by the way, when you dream, like your visual cortex runs in reverse, so your dreams are no longer safe. But we'll try this. So they had people watch a video and just narrate what was going on in the video in their mind. So there's a woman, she gets hit in the back, she falls over. This is what the computer reconstructed the person thinking. See a girl, looks just like me, get hit in the back, and then she is knocked off.
And the second way is to read nerve signals which only convey movement information and relay that movement information into prosthetics or other electronic devices. We already had brain implants that could do this 1 year ago.
So there it's picking up well.
For more than a decade, Gert-Jan Oskam has been trying to relearn to walk. A motorbike accident in his late 20s left him paralyzed from the hips down, changing his life forever. But now, Oskam is back on his feet, thanks to groundbreaking digital implants in his brain and his spine.
After 2 days, within 5 to 10 minutes, I could control my hips.
It works like this. When Oskam thinks about taking a step, a brain implant picks up the signals and sends them to a computer strapped to his back. The computer decodes it, then transmits the signal to a device in his spinal cord, triggering his legs to move. Scientists say it's like a digital bridge that bypasses the damaged part of his spine.
The brain implant didn't even need to be connected directly to the legs to do this. It could send all that movement data wirelessly. And there was a second company that could do this 5 years ago called Control Labs. The company has since been acquired by Meta. But remember, this technology is 5 years old.
To make this human-machine link possible, Kafosh and Reardon figured out how to tap into the body's nervous system.
Your brain actually generates commands that then propagate out to your muscles to allow you to move in the world. That's all relayed via what's called the motor nervous system. Ultimately, your brain sends down a signal down to your spinal cord, and your spinal cord in turn relays that out to the muscles. This is an electrical signal that actually is received at the muscle.
An armband outfitted with a number of sensors detects this electrical activity and sends it to a computer. From there, algorithms decode it and use the signals to manipulate a machine. Users can then do things like scroll through text, turn a dial, or select items from a menu. The signals can even be used to control robots.
You don't actually have to move for us to decode some of your intentions. What you have to do is generate that electrical pulse. So what you notice is my hand looks like it's in a fist right now, but if she just keeps me from opening my hand, I can actually open my hand all the way. Or we can turn it here and you'll notice I can like do 1 finger or 2 fingers or my whole hand. I do that by just generating the nerve impulse even though I'm not moving. We don't decode your movement, we decode your intention.
I got to give the system a go to see if it really works. First, I had to calibrate the sensors to my neural signals. It wasn't perfect, but the system was able to detect less intricate motions, such as picking up a water bottle or practicing the Queen's wave. Next, I got to really put the system to the test. My task? To hit a number of moving targets by just thinking about where I wanted the cursor to go and trying to not move my hand.
You basically want to retrain yourself to think about how you're going to generate force without really moving. Because you don't have to, right, but you're used to doing that. Right.
As the demo progressed, the system got better at reading my neural signals, and I got faster at hitting the targets.
You also have Neuralink, which has just started using human trials. But of course, this technology is only being used for people who are mentally or physically disabled, and being a gamer doesn't count. But of course, as the technology gets better and safer, it'll start being more readily available to non-disabled people. It could still be necessary use of the technology, even if it's not for disabled people. Like you could use it for dangerous jobs that might require very detailed human work, but are so dangerous that you're better off using mechanical limbs rather than fragile human limbs. And if it keeps getting better and cheaper, of course it will start being used by normal people for everyday activities and entertainment. And keep in mind, when Mark Zuckerberg was criticizing the Apple Vision Pro for its finicky controls, he brings up in passing the idea of using a neural network interface, because trying to use regular controls in VR just doesn't really work very well.
Apple's eye tracking is really nice. We actually had those sensors back in Quest Pro. We took them out for Quest 3, and we're going to bring them back in the future. It's a nice interface. It's not perfect for everything, though. For typing or complex tasks, you're going to want things like hands or a keyboard or controllers or eventually a neural interface for those kind of inputs.
And of course, understandably, a lot of people would have a problem trusting any corporation to read their minds and intentions. So you would need the technology to be limited to only reading movement data and no other kind of data that your brain has. But even with limitations and justified fears, it still won't stop the technological progress. For the purposes of prosthetics, the technology that only reads your nerve signals is the most useful, because your arms and legs already read nerve signals as movement data, and the prosthetic would only replace the function of normal limbs. But for entertainment purposes in VR and video games, it might be a really bad idea to use this technology, since you would still be sending nerve signals telling your body to move. So unless you were fully restrained, you would still be moving, which would be really inconvenient for virtual reality. But on the other hand, this tech is also a lot simpler, not just to make, but also for your brain to understand. Because your brain is already used to the idea of moving the body using only the nervous system, but it's not used to the idea of moving the body using only thought. Not to mention, reading only your nerve signals also means it's not reading your mind, so there would be some level of privacy compared to the alternative. But because it still forces you to move in real life in order to move your character, some people might prefer moving your character using only your thoughts rather than nerve signals. And some people might prefer a mix of both technologies. So, assuming we can move our in-game bodies just like our real-life bodies with the same level of detail and movement complexity, what could we theoretically do? In gaming, there's a term that is often used to celebrate a game and its developers. It's one of the most important parts of a good game. Some would argue the only part that really matters. Good gameplay. Basically, how does the game actually function? How are the controls and movement? How fun is the engagement with enemies and friends? With all these factors being taken into consideration, a game like Elden Ring can be praised for its gameplay and shocking amount of enemy variety. Modern open world games are already extremely creative and have lots of unique gameplay and environments. But most actual fighting in these games mostly just consists of roll, dodge, block, attack, and the attacks can have a lot more variance depending on the character and the game. The reason why the movesets are so limited is a combination of practicality and limitations of controllers. Programming all the possible moves a person can think of would not only be impossible, it would also be impractical for any controller or keyboard to run. You can't, for example, have your character in Elden Ring clasp their hands together in the shape of an imaginary gun and poke someone's anus with it. Well, maybe you can, there's probably already a mod for it. But if you download all the mods for possible new moves, you would probably forget how to use most of them, because you would require more and more complicated button combinations to do the same functions that a human can do by simply thinking about it. Compared to the amount of moves a human body can do in real life, it's not even comparable to a modern video game character. The amount of things you can do during a fight are basically infinite because there's no set number of moves. Playing a complex game using all the moves a human brain can know would make fighting in those games look less like games and more like game trailers or cutscenes. The ability to move your limbs in any direction would give way to being able to beat bosses with a lot more creativity, since you can use any fighting technique you want. If a game company were to make a game based on the TV show Avatar, instead of just having pre-made movesets for every character like every other game, you could let the player base actually bend elements any which way they want, since the controller limitations are your own imagination. In such a game, having superpowers would actually feel like having superpowers, and being able to do whatever you want with them, rather than having predefined movesets that can feel pretty boring. This alone would already make VR a great medium for art and entertainment, and it would convince a lot of people to use it, or at the very least give it a try. But it wouldn't be the only or even the main motivator, since we could also combine it with simulated realities to create different, unique worlds. AI in modern times is mostly known for being able to improve very quickly, going from making crappy, blurry images to incredible imitations of artworks and realistic images. It went from horribly grotesque monstrosities to fairly believable videos in just 1 year. The same thing could happen, or most likely will happen, to 3D environments and simulated worlds. You don't need AI to generate a 3D environment. Thanks to gaming, we already know how to generate giant worlds using very simple code. Like, for example, Minecraft, a game that can create virtually infinite new seeds for every player. Or Townscaper, a game that can create very aesthetically pleasing cities or villages. The obvious reason why games like these don't need AI to generate new worlds is because the world's rules and textures are very simple. They're just blocks with a set number of rules. How many can spawn in a certain area, where they can spawn, how they interact with blocks around them. These types of generated worlds don't need AI. The types that would need AI would be worlds with a lot more complexity. Like if you wanted an entire world with a steampunk aesthetic, with entire cityscapes and countries with one particular art style that isn't just the same patterns repeating over and over again, you would need an AI to figure something like that out. Or historical recreations like the California Gold Rush. The first couple of attempts at making a 3D world with AI will probably look like garbage, but it would only take 1 or 2 years at most for it to not be perfect but be good enough for human use. And once that happens, it'll start being adopted by a lot more people. When you're able to do things like go back to the Greek and Roman empires, not the historically accurate empires with low literacy rates and decent hygiene, but the fanfiction version that people have in their heads, where all the citizens are either smart philosophers or warriors living in perfectly clean buildings, and the gods actually exist and interact with the world. Very few people would actually use the historically accurate worlds, because the fanfic version would be viewed as being much better, but there would still be a use for the historically accurate versions. As an entertaining educational tool, it can give people a better understanding of scale and importance of certain historical events. If you don't know what I mean, imagine watching a documentary about the siege of Stalingrad and hearing someone describe the death toll both for the civilians and military population with numbers your brain can't comprehend. Compare that to being put in a historically accurate recreation where you get to live in the city and experience every part of the siege, from the bravery of the civilian population to the terror of most of the soldiers. From a bird's eye view, you would also be able to look at every part of the city, and you could switch between being on the ground and being in the air. Out of these two scenarios, which one do you think would give you a better sense of perspective and make you truly understand the magnitude of the event? I would argue the latter, because no matter how articulate or intelligent a historian is, there's no way for him to truly convey what happened, using only words and pictures, especially when compared to actually experiencing everything that happened. In modern times, the closest thing we have to a time machine is YouTube. It's the one place that lets you go back to past videos and witness how different people's music, fashion trends, and political beliefs were. And you can even witness what people thought life in the future would be like.
2001 will be the same age as I am now. Maybe he will be better adjusted to this kind of world that you're trying to portray.
The big difference when he grows up, in fact, if we wanted to wait for the year 2001, is that he will have in his own house, not a computer as big as this, but at least a console through which he can talk to his friendly local computer and get all the information he needs for his everyday life, like his bank statements, his theater reservations, all the information you need in the course of living in a complex modern society. This will be in a compact form in his own house. He'll have a television screen like these here, and a keyboard, and he'll talk to the computer and get information from it, and he'll take it as much for granted as we take the telephone.
This is already pretty crazy, but it is still not experiencing the past, which we can never truly do, but we can get much closer using VR. It can make it easier for historians to give a more visually accessible lesson on history, and maybe even change some of our views on certain historical events by focusing on elements that are rarely focused on. Most high school movies made in the 1990s and 80s look ridiculous, because most of the actors were adults and it made the students look like adults. But what a lot of people don't think about is how that problem also applies to war movies. Most movies don't depict just how young most men in old wars actually were. And if a virtually simulated war was approved of by historians, it could give a more accurate view of history. The average age of World War II soldiers was 26, and that is just the average. There were plenty of soldiers that were a lot younger.
And he said, Chick says, let's go down to the armory and enlist. I says, Chick, we're 15 years old. You have to be 18 years old. Chick said to me, Jake, we'll go down there. And when they ask you how old you are, you look them right in the eye and say, 18 years, sir. Sir, we'd like to join the National Guard. And I'm looking at him and thinking, 18. He said, what year were you born? Whoa, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I was born in 1922. Take 3 away from that, that's 1919. 1919, sir. He says, sign right here.
But history and education would still be a very small part of virtual reality. It wouldn't be nearly as important as antisocial and social entertainment from the comfort of your own home. There are plenty of people who can't interact with the outside world, either because of age, disability, or just because they don't want to.
Penny Nelson is unstoppable on the battlefields.
Switch weapons.
Here at home, life is, whoa, ow, a little more contained.
I'm disabled. Walking is torture for me. It's really painful, and I can only go so far.
A lot of people like Penny Nelson would probably feel like they could do a lot more with their time if being social and playing with others was possible without having to move your real body. If there was a social media equivalent in VR, a lot of people would be able to spend more time there and interact with people who will perceive them the way they want to be perceived. For a person who has a disability, getting it fixed could cost a lot more money than just entering a virtual world where there would be no disability. And since it's a virtual reality, you can put yourself in fake danger, like parkour or running with bulls or climbing a mountain. Also, the ability to present yourself the way you want to be perceived wouldn't just apply to disabled people. If you're, for example, trans, spending tens of thousands of dollars on surgery and hormones would be a pretty hard sell, when you could just be whatever you want by pressing a button. And since you can change every aspect of yourself, only changing your gender in VR would be the most boring option, when you can have gills or be the size of a skyscraper, or even be a minotaur. I could keep describing all the possible things a person could turn themselves into, but there's no point because the limits are literally your own imagination. But it's not just your body that you can alter and give powers to. You can create specific worlds for their own purposes. For playing a game like D&D, a virtual world would be very useful. Being able to generate your own world however you like and having any powers you can imagine would make the game a lot more engaging and a lot easier to get into. Obviously, this wouldn't replace people who enjoy making their own world in their own house, because that's a hobby in and of itself. But for people who want to take advantage of the possibilities of 3D and digital art, and people who just want a quick game with good graphics, or a large, long-running world that they can enter whenever they want, for those purposes, this would be a very useful tool. The social aspect would be a lot more impactful for MMORPGs, like WoW or Monster Hunter, since they deal with a lot more people. And you don't need to be social in a virtual world. You can make your own universe where you are your own god, with artificial inhabitants and endless power. Everyone would be able to do this, which can be a really big social problem. We already see people who have trouble with being self-conceited in modern times. Imagine if people could look exactly how they've always wanted and could live in their own universe, where everything that happens according to their plans and desires. This would be a completely new form of narcissism, where you are literally the center of your own universe. And even though it might cause some problems, it would also be extremely popular and profitable for any company that makes it. Imagine how much a weeb would be willing to pay to live in their own isekai anime, or how much most people would pay to live in their own stylized universe where everything looks beautifully designed. But the reason why I say virtual reality won't just be a big entertainment market, but the largest ever seen, potentially larger than all the others combined, is because you can do all the other forms of entertainment in it. There's no limitations, and there are no real consequences for dumb behavior. The likelihood of getting harmed or dying from adventurous activities would basically be zero. There's a very specific unit of measurement that measures the probability of death at any given moment or during certain activities. It's called a micromort, and 1 micromort means you have 1 in 1 million chance of death during a certain activity. For example, the likelihood of dying from scuba diving is 1 in 200,000. Which means scuba diving is rated at 5 micromorts. Eating 40 teaspoons of peanut butter is rated at 1 micromorts. For the elderly, simply getting out of bed is more dangerous than some of the most dangerous activities a young person can do. Getting out of bed at the age of 75 is rated at 105 micromorts. And it's 463 micromorts at 90 years of age. So being in virtual reality for some people would just be a safety concern. Violent crime doesn't exist in virtual reality. You could walk down a dark alleyway and be completely fine. You could punch gang members, pirates, even animals, and be completely fine because it's all just play pretend. And if people's social and workspaces, like office buildings, were in VR, things like terrorist attacks would be a lot less deadly, and less likely to happen, simply because there would never be that many people collected in one specific area in real life. And remember, since most of this technology won't be available for at least a few decades, the quote-unquote old people who will be utilizing this technology for safety and social activities will be you and your friends, because you will be a very old person by 2100. There would also be a lot more artistic freedom, and the ability to express yourself with ideas and concepts that are not possible to create in the real world, simply because of physical limitations. Like the mall in Las Vegas called Omega Mart. The whole appeal is that it's an absurdist alternative reality game that lets you explore and uncover secrets. Some parts of the mall are just a bit off, and other parts are literal mazes. And some doors lead to spaces that are completely different from regular rooms and mall areas, with distortions and glitches being mimicked in real life. This is already pretty difficult to do in real life, especially at this scale, and it's already pretty creative on its own. But imagine how much larger you could make the idea in a world with no limits, and more importantly, imagine all the creative forms of attraction and entertainment a small artist could come up with that are not currently being built because they require an insane amount of money and resources. Salvador Dali is an artist that popularized surrealism, an artistic and cultural movement that focuses on the beauty of the unexpected and the uncanny, vaguely inspired by dreams and dream-like states of being. Art forms like surrealism and projects like Omega Mart would be a lot easier to create at any scale and level of absurdity in a simulated world where the laws of physics are literally whatever you want them to be. You could create specific worlds for every single art style. Liminal spaces could also be created, because some people would also love to explore those worlds as well. Not to mention hyperbolic geometries. No need to limit mathematics and space to regular geometry. One thing that I always thought was a bit disappointing about space exploration, besides how far away everything is, has always been the periodic table. A great work of science used to discover all elements. But the discovery of all elements on Earth and the creation of undiscovered ones inside laboratories means that when we go to other planets, we won't discover any new elements. We've already found or made all the ones that are possible. In a virtual world, this isn't a problem. You can make any new element and give it whatever properties you want. Any fictional, theoretical, or rare substance can be in abundance. Everything I just described might seem like it would already be massive on its own, and the largest an entertainment platform could possibly be. But I would argue that being able to do whatever you want and be wherever you want would only be the beginning, and would only be step 1 of simulated realities. Because step 2 would be a chip that can not only take information from the brain and relay it to a computer, but instead do the opposite, taking in data from a simulated world and relaying it back to the brain as sensory data, adding feel and touch to a virtual world. It can be hard to perfectly predict what people will use virtual reality for, even without feel and touch. But I believe it is impossible to predict what people will do in VR with sensory feedback data being added. One of the reasons why is because of art. If you went back in time to the discovery of electricity and asked people, what do you think this technology will be used for in the future? The only answer you would get would be stuff like lighting up a room or a street, or communication over long distances. But of course, no one would ever predict electric guitars or music amps, or electric drills, TVs, microphones, Photoshop, and many other things that came as a direct result of the discovery of electricity. And some of the biggest mediums of art and entertainment in our time that no one in the past could possibly predict. In a simulated world, where touch feedback is possible, and artists can make a world where you can feel the wind blowing on your skin, smell the environment around you, and you don't even need VR goggles or headphones because the chip can give you sensory data from all your senses. That would include sight and hearing. This would give an artist the ability to give you an experience that no one in the modern world could ever possibly imagine. Being able to control not just what someone hears, but what they feel in their entire body is an absurd amount of control. And again, it's just not possible to make any predictions on how people would use that new technology to make new experiences and entertainment. Even with our current amount of freedom to only hear sounds and see colors that artists want us to see and hear, artists already have the ability to create things like The Caretakers Everywhere at the End of Time, a series of albums that explores the different stages of dementia, all the way from the beginning to its totality. and it already has profound emotional effects on people. And that's just what artists are able to do with just one of our senses. Imagine if they could explore all of them. Even with only being able to control what people can hear, there would still be a lot more you could do in VR than in real life. This is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, one of the most iconic symphonies in the world, but its most well-known performance isn't by Beethoven or even another German composer. It's a Japanese version performed by 10,000 people. For very obvious reasons, this version is a lot more well known, and it's incredibly impressive. To recreate something like this and experience it for yourself in real life would either be impossible or extremely expensive. The only reason this was possible in Japan was because most of these artists were willing to sing and work for free. But in a simulated world, you could recreate this experience, not just with the same number of people once, but an infinite amount of times with 1 million people. It wouldn't be quite as impressive, obviously, but the experience would feel the same, if not better. Now imagine how many unique renditions and large-scale recreations you could make out of musicals and theatrical experiences. For example, you could recreate Mozart's Lacrimosa with 10,000 people instead of the usual couple dozen. And those 10,000 people, or even 1 million people, could be people from all around the world collected in a social area for the simple purpose of recreating a musical masterpiece. Trying to do the same thing with all songs in real life would be basically impossible. The only reason it's possible in Japan is because it's a cultural tradition to do it with this one specific song. You could also use artificial intelligence to create fake people that could recreate the same sounds and singing tones of 1 million people. There are some very obvious things that would happen as a direct result of getting sensory data from a digital world, like blindness no longer being a thing in VR. Same with deafness. The way plants and animals behave in VR is also decided by people. So you could create a world where you can have a pet bear, and it would feel just as fluffy and cuddly as a real-life bear without being as dangerous in any way. And since you can specify what you taste and how different the foods are flavored and textured, it could give chefs and more creative types the ability to create flavor combinations and mouth sensations that are simply impossible in real life. Not to mention, none of the foods would have any actual calories. Basically, no consequences. You can feel what it would feel like to drink poison and not die. I don't even know why you would want to do that, but you can. When you control your senses, you can also decide how many G-forces you can feel, giving you the ability to create the sensation of being on a roller coaster, a jet, rockets, or low gravity to no gravity environments. And of course, VR pornography would be a lot more immersive. I'm not going to go into detail on how. You can probably use your own imagination. But it would bring up weird relationship issues. Because would it count as cheating to go through a VR experience where you're having sex with a porn star? And before you answer that, would you consider it sex if two people in a long-distance relationship on opposite sides of the planet had sex in virtual reality and it felt exactly the same as in real life? And do you think people in that relationship would have good reason to believe that if you use VR to have sex with your neighbor, it's basically cheating? I don't know the answer to most of these questions. Obviously, it would depend on individual relationship boundaries and cultural norms of the future. Even in modern day Tokyo, it's pretty common to hear people consider having sex with a prostitute to not be cheating.
風俗に行くことは浮気かどうか、Yes か No で。
No.
No.
So the idea of some people and some societies in the future not considering VR sex as cheating could be a thing. Another thing sensory data could be used for is recreating psychedelic effects, which if it can be done effectively, it would be another huge market all on its own, just replacing drugs. Psychedelic and hallucinatory effects could also be useful for psychologists that are wondering what their patient is seeing if they are suffering from various forms of schizophrenia. Since there will be a lot of investment and want to understand how the brain works and interacts with the chip, it might allow psychologists and neurologists to understand more and more on how the brain works and operates with different chemicals and electrical signals. That research in understanding the human brain could on its own fix certain conditions like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. But if you can send sensory data to make people feel certain things at will, what if you could willingly feel certain unique emotions as well? For example, when we have dreams, how we feel usually has no relation to what we're actually seeing and experiencing. Like, some of the weirdest and most unnatural things can happen around you, and your brain will still feel like everything is normal. And all of a sudden, for no reason, you can just feel terror and wake up in a cold sweat just because your brain decided it felt that way. It's possible you might feel some unique emotions in dreams that you cannot feel in real life. For example, the Baroque composer Giuseppe Tartini came up with his greatest work after a dream where he met the devil and listened to him play the violin. And that's why he called the piece Devil's Trill. And although people loved it and thought it was Giuseppe's greatest work, Giuseppe argued that what he made was complete garbage compared to the original. It was so bad compared to the original that he wanted to destroy his violin and quit music forever. Now, I don't doubt Giuseppe. I of course don't believe he actually spoke to the devil, but I do believe that what he heard and what he felt in his dreams was unique and truly impossible to recreate in real life, for the same reason you can't recreate every thought and idea you have in your dream in real life. But if the brain can be made to reenact these states of mind and feelings, we might be able to open a whole new era of entertainment. One where you can have your own dream-like experiences at will, man-made dreams that can't be replicated in real life. And if you ever wake up from a really good dream, you might be able to save that dream and relive it as much as you want.
Here he is. Hi.
A lot of people have the fear that in virtual reality the sky would be filled with ads, and so would the ocean. I personally don't believe that would happen, at least not in most virtual worlds. There would be no need for pop-up ads. There would be sneakier ways to market a product. If you spend a significant amount of your life in VR, the companies that run that VR world would know a lot about you. And they could use that information and data to basically read your mind. And they would know exactly what would get you to buy a certain product. For an extreme example, they could use a cute AI girl that looks exactly like your dream girl in every way, and she shares all your hobbies and interests. But just like YouTubers' ad breaks, she randomly mentions a random product that you can buy in real life.
Why don't you let me fix you some of this new Mococo drink? All natural cocoa beans from the upper slopes of Mountain Nicaragua, no artificial sweeteners.
What the hell are you talking about? Who are you talking to?
I've tasted other cocos. This is the best.
And by the way, in modern day open world games, there are no pop-up ads everywhere. If this was profitable, wouldn't we expect the skies in GTA to be filled with ads? Or billboards all over Battlefield 1 trying to sell you orange juice? The reason why this doesn't happen is obvious. Because these games make most of their money from in-game cosmetics and pay to win. And so do most other games, and so will most virtual worlds in the future. Because pay to win in a world that simulates the real world would be a no-brainer. And why would these VR companies even want to advertise real-life products? The more ads you get for real-life products that might be really cool, the less likely you are to spend your time in virtual reality. They would want the opposite. They would want you to spend all your time and money on your virtual self. For the same reason video game companies want you to. It's just more profitable when you literally run the universe. And all the markets, stores, and cosmetics. But we still have to wonder whether normal people would like or dislike virtual reality. In the study of history, there's something that basically all historians have to remember to do. And that is, of course, to try not to bring your own biases and ways of seeing the world in modern times into your analysis of historical events, and the way historical figures have reacted to situations. I'm bringing this up as a point because a lot of people watching this probably think this sounds dystopian and awful, which isn't necessarily wrong either. But a lot of people watching this in the present might be shocked by how people in the future might view it. Because people's philosophy in the future could be completely different to our own, much in the same way that a person a few centuries ago would view modern humans as being completely weird or alien. If a person considered a movie or a TV show to be real, we would pretty quickly assume that they were either joking or mentally unwell. And for good reason. Not being able to tell the difference between fiction and reality can be a sign of a mental disability. But when it comes to virtual reality, this phenomenon might be a lot more common. When you're confusing your brain by switching between virtual reality and reality, depending on how good the virtual world is, a lot of people might start having a difficult time understanding the difference. And others might even intentionally argue that there is no difference at all. A philosopher in the future could ask the question, what is the difference between the virtual and the real? If the way we decide that something is real is with observation using our senses, smell, taste, sight, hearing, and touch, and virtual world has all of it, what is the difference? If a person has their personal and social experiences in the virtual, wife, friends, adventures, lessons, and family, who are you to decide that that is not real enough? And oddly enough, he could even use Plato's allegory of the cave in reverse to argue that trying to restrict a person's experiences solely to the real world is just like restricting a person to living in a cave with their only experiences being limited to shadows on a wall. Because the things you can do in the real world are limited by physics and resource limitations. The virtual world will always have more of what people desire, and the lack of limitations would make the virtual many orders of magnitude larger than the real, since it would be an infinite fractal of possibilities and universes, limited only by human and artificial imagination. And so, limiting someone to a smaller world with more restrictions could be interpreted as you trying to trap people in a cave, much in the same way that you would view having your phone or internet taken away from you as a form of assault on your freedoms. Because it would be taking you away from a lot of friends and family that might be living far away, and so much of people's personal life and even jobs are so tied to the internet that having that taken away from them would feel like being isolated from society and locked in a cave. A person born in 2100 could view virtual reality in the same light, and there would be people who would argue that of course the virtual world is less real than the real world, since you can literally turn off the virtual world whenever you want, and the virtual world needs this world in order to exist. But again, someone could respond with, why is the realness of a world measured by how hard it is to destroy it? If we knew that this world could be destroyed just as easily, would it make all of our experiences less real? And how can you even be confident that this reality isn't a simulation as well? Especially since the way you determine what is and isn't real is by observation using your senses. The very same instruments that are used in a simulated world to feel more real. And remember that a disabled person being limited to the real world would be a nightmare once they've gotten used to the virtual. Because you're basically telling them that the only real world that exists is one where they can't see, hear, or move. As long as you can't fully determine if the real world is even real, I will always prefer living in a world with no insects, disease, danger, disability, and wars with no consequences. By the way, I want to clarify that I don't necessarily believe that all these arguments are true and good, just that these are possible rationalizations people could make in the future. And some people will of course have the opposite opinion. What are the Amish? Even though there are many different types of Amish people, most of them have a few very distinct features. The use of horse and carriage for transportation, rejection of TVs, online access, and public utilities like electricity. Basically, a voluntary rejection of society. And a collective idea that a lot of technology that we use on a regular basis is simply unnecessary. The rejection of certain technologies is something that is done by a lot of groups and individuals.
And I'm offering exactly the right amount of money here on the help desk. So you people take that money, £1.90, and I will take my strawberries outside.
You can't take
you want to call the
that.
police?
You can't take that. The police is on their way. You can't take that. Police is on their way. You can't take that.
I paid by legal tender.
No, don't break the door. Do not break the door.
I paid by legal tender, and I am going out with my strawberries. And I'm going to eat them. I'm going to eat my strawberries. I paid by legal tender in this dystopian place.
And each major advancement in technology or society will always have people who are skeptical or outright hostile towards it. This belief that new technology can be so unnatural, uncanny, and unnecessary is definitely something I could imagine being felt about AI and simulated reality. Contemporary society already has films like The Matrix, where being trapped in a simulated world and trying to escape is the whole basis for the plot. The movie depicts the idea as a dystopia. There's also movies like The Terminator, which show the end of human civilization at the hands of AI. And there's an almost never-ending stream of skepticism and conspiracy towards having a chip placed inside the human body, for very understandable reasons. So you can totally imagine, just like the Amish, a group of people willingly choosing to stop advancing and simply pretending like the world really did end or stop advancing after 2012, creating their own society with no AI, simulated reality, self-driving cars, and especially no human chips. Now, some of you watching will probably argue that some of the things I just mentioned aren't really that bad. But remember, just like the Amish, there would be different levels of what people consider acceptable, which I think would make the group very disorganized and fragmented, because deciding where to draw the line on technology can be very difficult. For example, would you let a person who's paralyzed from the neck down not use a chip to control robotic limbs? Would you even be allowed to use the internet because a lot of the internet is just AI, and the amount of content that is just AI is only growing. And what about using simulated reality to test construction techniques? Or design better products? I could keep going, but I think you get the point. It would be very difficult, but probably doable for some communities. Personally though, I think most people will at least give it a try if the technology is really good and useful. Because the sheer size and scope of the virtual world and all the things you could do and explore would simply be too tempting. But you probably have a different opinion, and you can let me know in the comments down below. Anyways, that's it. Please be sure to like and subscribe and follow me on my Twitch. Link in the description. Bye.
А звезды падают на цвет лучах зари.